So I received a question from a subscriber, Mad Agent 101, and she asked that I explain the monthly expenses of running a trucking business. So in this video, that's what I do. But before I go through those expenses, I first want to explain to everybody how my accountant brain works and how I look at, expenses in my trucking business. In my mind, there are two types of expenses in my business. One is variable expenses, the other is fixed expenses, also known as overhead. Now, what's the difference in the two? Variable, if you think about what the name implies, it varies. So that's going to be based on usage. So anytime that my truck runs, I have variable expenses. If the truck doesn't run, then those expenses don't exist. Fixed expenses, on the other hand, or overhead, those expenses, they're fixed. They don't change. They don't move. So it doesn't matter if the truck runs no days of the month or if it runs every day of the month, those expenses will still be there and they won't change. So now that we have that, simple, clear understanding of fixed expenses versus variable expenses, let's get right into a few of the examples. So variable expenses. In the trucking business, the biggest expense you're going to have that's a variable expense is going to be fuel. Which makes sense. If you don't drive the truck, then you don't have fuel. If you do drive the truck, then you will have fuel. So that's why that falls under the variable expense category. Now, depending on whether or not you're an owner operator or you've hired a driver, you're going to have driver pay as a variable expense. If the driver doesn't work, driver doesn't get paid. So that's why driver pay is a variable expense. Another one is depending on how you get paid for your loads. If you use a factoring company or a broker's quick pay option, then you're going to have to pay a certain percentage of your revenue out to that company in order to get paid faster. So I'll put factoring fees / quick pay. Another variable expense is you're going to have tolls. Scales, that's another variable expense. If you're driving, if you're loading up your trucks, you're going to want to weigh those loads to make sure that you're not overloaded. Permits, that's another variable expense. So these are trip permits. So if you're hauling, let's say, an oversized load, then you're going to have to get certain permits in order to legally pull that load. So those permit costs, those are going to be under your variable costs as well. Now, depending on whether or not you're booking your loads or if you're paying somebody else to book those loads, then you're going to have dispatcher expenses or dispatcher pay. And another variable expense, that one of the most important ones, is your repairs and maintenance. Now, in my repairs and maintenance category, I put anything from, tire repair, oil change, all the way to, truck washes. I put all that stuff under my repairs and maintenance category. Now, I think we have a pretty good idea of what some of the typical variable expenses are. So now I'm going to go over and talk about what the fixed expenses are, or overhead. So some of the big ones: insurance, now if your truck doesn't move for the entire month, you're still going to have that same insurance bill to pay. So that's why it's a fixed expense. Also, your equipment payments. So whether that be a truck payment or a trailer payment, whether it's a lease or a buy, you're gonna have to pay for your equipment. Now again, the banks, they don't care whether or not you've moved any loads this week or this month. They're still gonna want their payment. Parking, that's another overhead expense. Now, if you use a load board to, get your loads, or your dispatcher uses a load board to get your loads, then, your load board subscription is going to be a fixed expense also. ELD. Now, there's some people who they pay pay an annual subscription for their electronic logs, but I don't do that. I actually pay mine on a monthly basis. So my ELD is a fixed overhead expense for me. Accounting fees. Now, to keep track of all of this stuff so that your books are in line. Now, I don't pay an accountant because I do my own accounting. However, I would recommend anybody else out there to have an accountant who's looking at your stuff. I recommend monthly, but some people may go quarterly and even annually, but I recommend monthly. Cell phone and internet. Those are overhead expenses that you're gonna have, regardless if you move a load or not. Let's see. One expense that I left out from the variable expenses category, hotels. If you're not on the road, then you won't have hotel expenses, but if you are on the road, you possibly will. So hotels is a variable expense. So these are just a few of the expenses that came right off the top of my head. I went through my profit and loss statement for a month, and I went through each of my expenses and made this list based on that. Now, depending on how you run your business, you may have, different expenses. You may have more or less than this. But nonetheless, if you could think of some expenses that I may have left out, go ahead and leave a comment and leave what those expenses are. For bonus points, go ahead and say whether or not it's a fixed expense or if it's a variable expense. So, Mad Agent 101, I hope this answered your question. And anybody else out there who had a similar question, hopefully this will help you guys out as well. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you know somebody else who could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video to them as well. Thanks again for watching.